I caught my wife cheating, staged my own affair, and exposed her on Christmas, but the real betrayal came next. When I first met Emily, she felt like the kind of woman you only read about in novels. She had this magnetic energy, the kind that lit up a room and drew everyone's attention. I was no exception. From the moment I saw her across the room at a mutual friend's party, I was hooked. She had an easy laugh, a sharp wit, and a way of making you feel like the only person in the world when she talked to you. Within a year, we were inseparable. By year 2 we were married. The wedding was perfect, an intimate ceremony at her parents' sprawling lake house. I could still remember the way she smiled at me as we said our vows, her eyes brimming with what I thought was genuine love. Everyone told me how lucky I was to have found her, and I believed them. The first few years were everything I dreamed of. We supported each other through the grind of establishing our career years. I worked as an engineer, pulling long hours at a demanding firm, while Emily climbed the ladder in her fast-paced marketing job. We were a team, or so I thought. We saved for a house, planned for the future, and spent weekends dreaming about the family we'd eventually build. But as the years went on, the small subtle changes started creeping in. At first, I chalked it up to the natural shifts that happen in any relationship. Emily started working later, her phone glued to her hand even during dinner. She was always busy, whether it was with work events, gym sessions, or coffee meetups with coworkers. I shrugged it off. She was ambitious, and I respected that. Then there were the unexplained absences, a canceled dinner date here, a weekend trip with friends there. She was quick with excuses, always framing it as something unavoidable, and I never pushed. I trusted her. It wasn't until October, an ordinary rainy Tuesday evening, then my blind faith came crashing down. I had come home from work a little earlier than usual, my head still buzzing from a day full of deadlines and meetings. Emily wasn't home yet, which wasn't unusual. She often stayed late at the office, especially during her busy seasons. Her laptop was open on the dining table, its screen glowing faintly in the dim room. I wasn't the type to snoop, but as I walked past, a message popped up on the screen. The notification wasn't from anyone I recognized, it was from someone named Nathan. Curiosity flickered, followed immediately by guilt. I trusted Emily. I shouldn't invade her privacy, but something about the message noted me. It wasn't the words themselves, just a simple, "Can't wait to see you this weekend," but the casual intimacy of it. Before I could stop myself, I clicked on the message thread. What I found made my stomach drop. The messages were explicit, full of inside jokes, pet names, and references to moments that clearly weren't innocent. They spoke of stolen nights, passionate weekends, and plans for a future that didn't include me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through months of conversations, each one a dagger to the chest. By the time I finished, I felt numb. Emily, the woman I had devoted my life to, was having an affair, not just a fling or a one-time mistake. This was a full-blown relationship built on deception and betrayal. The shock quickly gave way to rage. How long had she been lying to me? How many times had I stayed late at work to build the life we shared, only for her to spend that time with someone else? But as furious as I was, I didn't confront her right away. I knew Emily well enough to know that if I acted on impulse, she would manipulate the situation, twist it in her favor. Instead, I forced myself to think strategically. For the next few days, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I smiled, kissed her goodnight, and asked about her day. Meanwhile, I quietly collected evidence, screenshots of the messages, records of her calls, and even a tracker on her car to confirm her whereabouts. What I found only deepened my resolve. Emily wasn't just cheating, she was brazen about it. The late nights at the office were cover stories for hotel meetups, the work trips were romantic getaways with Nathan. Every detail I uncovered was another crack in the foundation of our marriage, one that couldn't be repaired. But confrontation wasn't enough for me. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal she had inflicted on me. That's when the idea came to me. I would make Emily believe I was cheating too. The plan took shape slowly, but each piece fit perfectly. I started staying out late, inventing fake work meetings and events. I dressed better, wore cologne I hadn't used in years, and made a point to keep my phone locked and just out of reach. I even staged fake text messages from a non-existent coworker, planning them where Emily could see them, but not too obviously. The change in her behavior was immediate. Emily, who had once been so cool and detached, became paranoid. She Started asking pointed questions about where I had been and who I had been with. She checked my phone when she thought I wasn't looking and grew visibly agitated when I left the house without explanation. I could see the doubt growing in her eyes, and it gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. For the first time Emily wasn't in control. As the weeks passed, I refined my plan. Christmas Eve was fast approaching, and Emily had planned a lavish party at our house. Friends, family, and coworkers were all invited, and she had spared no expense. It was the perfect stage for what I had in mind. I decided that Christmas Eve would be my final act. While Emily played hostess, basking in the glow of her carefully curated image, I would set my plan and emotion. By the time the night was over, she wouldn't just be reeling from the realization that I knew about her affair, she'd be dealing with the legal and personal fallout of the bombshell I was about to drop the key to. The plan was precision. I didn't want this to be messy or emotional. I wanted it to be cold, calculated, and inescapable. Emily had built her life on lies, and I was going to use those lies to bring it all crashing down. As I finalized the details, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the oblivious husband or the naive fool. I was in control, and the power was exhilarating. In the days leading up to Christmas Eve, I fine-tuned every detail of my plan. If this was going to work, it had to be flawless. I wasn't just exposing Emily's lies, I was dismantling the facade she had built piece by piece. She had taken everything I believed in and turned it into a joke, but now it was my turn to rewrite the ending. I started by securing the legal side of things quietly. I met with a divorced lawyer recommended by a trusted friend. I handed over all the evidence. I gathered the screenshots of Emily's texts with Nathan, the call logs, the tracker data showing their meetups. My lawyer's expression turned grim as he skimmed through the file. With this level of proof, he assured me the case would be airtight. Not only would I secure a clean break, but I'd also put myself in a favorable position when it came to dividing assets. The next step was preparing my exit. I didn't just want to serve Emily with divorce papers. I wanted to vanish from her life entirely, leaving nothing but the rubble of her deception behind. I rented a storage unit in a neighboring town and began moving my most important belongings there, piece by piece: personal documents, sentimental items, and anything of value that I didn't want to leave behind. It all went into the unit under a fake name at home. I maintained the illusion of normally. Emily was preoccupied with planning the party, so she didn't notice the subtle changes. My drawers appeared full, my clothes hung neatly in the closet, and my daily routines remained unchanged, but in reality, I was systematically erasing myself from our shared life. The final piece of the puzzle was ensuring that Emily would be blindsided on Christmas Eve morning. I scheduled a courier to deliver the divorce papers to her during the party. I also arranged for copies to be sent to her parents and a few close friends, people she couldn't ignore or manipulate into a silence. The goal was maximum exposure. By the time the day arrived, the stage was set. That morning, Emily was in full hostess mode. She flitted around the house, directing the caterers, arranging decorations, and triple-checking the guest list. She had always loved throwing elaborate events, and tonight was no exception. Watching her bask in the glow of her own self-importance was almost amusing. She was so focused on impressing everyone that she didn't notice the quiet storm brewing just beneath the surface. As guests began to arrive that evening, I played my role to perfection. I greeted everyone with a warm smile, engaged in polite conversation, and even helped refill drinks. No one would have suspected that the man chatting casually by the fireplace was hours away from dropping a bombshell that would shatter the illusion of a perfect marriage. Emily, ever the social butterfly, was in her element. She moved effortlessly between groups, laughing, chatting, and occasionally stealing glances at me. I could see the unease in her eyes, a flicker of suspicion that something wasn't quite right, but she didn't dare confront me. Not tonight. When the clock struck 8, the courier arrived. I watched from across the room as he handed Emily the envelope, her name printed neatly across the front. She glanced at me briefly, confusion etched on her face. Before opening it, the room fell silent. As she read the contents, her face turned pale, then flushed with anger and disbelief. For a moment she looked around as if hoping someone would confirm that this was all some elaborate joke, but the reality set in quickly. The divorce Papers weren't just a formality, they included a detailed account of her affair with Nathan, complete with evidence. Every lie she had told, every betrayal was laid bare in black and white. I left the room before she could recover, retreating to the bedroom to grab the small bag I had packed earlier. By the time Emily regained her composure enough to look for me, I was gone, but the true blow came after I left. I had scheduled a series of automated emails to be sent that night, one to Nathan, one to Emily's boss, and one to her parents. Each email contained a summary of her affair, complete with evidence. The message to her boss was particularly damning, as it highlighted how Emily had used work-related trips as cover for her rendezvous with Nathan. As I drove away from the house, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The life I had built with Emily was over, but so was the hold she had over me. For the first time in years, I felt free. But as I checked into the small motel where I planned to stay for a few days, I received a text that stopped me cold. It wasn't from Emily or Nathan, it was from an unknown number. The message read, "I know what you've done, you're not the only one with secrets." My heart pounded as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities. Who had sent the message, and what could they possibly mean? The text haunted me all night as I sat in the dimly lit motel room staring at the message. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me all along. The timing was too perfect. I had just executed the most carefully planned exit of my life, and now out of nowhere came this cryptic warning. I spent hours replaying every step of my plan, scrutinizing each detail for a mistake. Had I left behind evidence that someone could use against me, or worse, had someone been tracking my movements without my knowledge? The message didn't seem like a random threat, it was deliberate, targeted, and meant to rattle me. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. Using the number from the text, I tried to trace the sender through an online reverse phone lookup. Nothing came up. Was a burner phone. Frustration noted at me, but I wasn't about to let fear control my next move. Whoever this was, they wanted me off balance, and I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. To regain focus, I turned my attention back to Emily. Her reaction to the divorce papers must have been explosive. I imagine her scrambling to do damage control, calling Nathan, her parents, and anyone else who might lend her an ear. But thanks to the automated emails I'd sent out, the truth was already spreading far beyond her reach. By mid-morning, confirmation of the chaos came in the form of an email from my lawyer. He informed me that Emily had attempted to contact his office, hysterical and demanding that the papers be withdrawn. When he refused, she reportedly accused him and me of orchestrating a malicious plot to humiliate her. That was putting it lightly. Still, the message from the unknown sender lingered in my mind, its implications nagging at me. If they knew what I had done, did they mean they were close to Emily, or was it someone entirely unrelated, someone with their own agenda? Later that day, I drove back to the storage unit where I had stashed my belongings. It was a nondescript facility on the outskirts of a neighboring town, chosen deliberately for its anonymity. I needed to retrieve a few items, a laptop, some documents, but as I pulled into the lot, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A car was parked a few rows away, its windows tinted so dark that I couldn't see inside. I hadn't noticed it during my previous visits, and it struck me as out of place. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a coincidence, or was someone following me? I parked several units away, and kept my movements deliberate but calm. Unlocking the unit, I quickly grabbed what I needed, keeping an eye on the car the entire time. It didn't move, but the longer I stayed, the more certain I became that I wasn't alone. When I finally left, I took a circuitous route back to the motel, checking my mirrors constantly for any sign of the car. I didn't see it again, but the sense of being hunted lingered. Back at the motel, I decided to take a more proactive approach. If someone thought they could scare me, I needed to figure out who they were before they made their next move. I pulled up the digital backups of the emails I'd sent, carefully reviewing the recipients. Nathan had clearly received his copy. He had left me a string of angry voicemails that I hadn't bothered to listen to. Emily's parents and boss would have received theirs as well, but neither had reached out to me directly. Then I noticed something odd. One of the email addresses I'd used to send the evidence to Emily's close friends bounced back as undeliverable. It was a minor detail, easy to overlook, but It struck me as strange. The address belonged to a mutual friend from years ago, a woman named Rachel, who had been part of our social circle when Emily and I first got married. Rachel and Emily had been close back then, but their friendship had cooled over time. I hadn't thought twice about including her in the emails, assuming she would still care enough to know the truth, but now with the email undelivered and the cryptic text looming in my mind, I wondered if Rachel's absence was more intent than I had realized. Driven by curiosity, I decided to look her up. A quick search revealed that Rachel had moved out of state a few years ago and had kept a relatively low profile since her social media accounts were private, but the few photos she'd posted hinted at a quiet, uneventful life. Still, something about her disappearance from Emily's life and now mine seemed off. As the day stretched into evening, my paranoia grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel or whoever had sent the text knew more than they were letting on. I needed answers, but I also knew that poking the hornet's nest without a plan could backfire spectacularly. That night, as I reviewed my next steps, another text arrived from the same unknown number. This time it was even shorter. Check your storage unit. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone about the storage unit. No one knew where I had moved my belongings, not my lawyer, not my friends, not even my family. The only way someone could have known was if they had been following me. I spent the next hour debating whether to go back. The thought of walking into a trap kept me glued to the motel bed, but curiosity eventually won out. Armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, I drove to the unit, parking a good distance away and approaching on foot. The lot was eerily quiet, the faint hum of a nearby highway the only sound. My unit appeared untouched, the padlock still secure, but as I stepped closer, I noticed something chilling. A folded piece of paper was wedged between the door and the frame, its edges fluttering faintly in the breeze. I grabbed it cautiously, unfolding it under the harsh beam of my flashlight. The message was scrawled and hurried, almost frantic handwriting. You're not the only one with evidence, watch your back. The note in the storage unit confirmed what I had suspected. I was being watched. Whoever this person was, they weren't just playing games. They wanted me to know they were in control, that every move I made was under their scrutiny. My pulse raced as I read the hurried scrawl over and over. What evidence were they talking about? Was it something I had overlooked, or had my orchestrated revenge triggered a response I couldn't foresee? I left the unit, quickly scanning the lot for any signs of movement. The eerie silence made my skin crawl, as though the very air had conspired to keep me on edge. There was no one in sight, but the message was clear. I wasn't alone. Back at the motel, I locked the door and sat down with everything I knew. I spread the notes, texts, and emails across the bed like pieces of a puzzle. The problem was none of the pieces seemed to fit. The text messages implied intimate knowledge of my actions, but the mention of evidence pointed to something larger. My thoughts kept circling back to Rachel, her bounced email, her sudden disappearance from Emily's life, and her name coming up. Just as this mystery unfolded, it couldn't be a coincidence, but Rachel had never seemed like the type to get involved in something this elaborate. Then again, neither had Emily, and yet here we were. Deciding I needed more information, I dove deeper into Rachel's background, using every tool at my disposal: public records, old contacts, even some less than legal methods. I uncovered fragments of her life since she moved away. She had started a small consulting business, stayed active in her local community, and largely kept out of trouble, but something odd caught my attention. 2 years ago, Rachel had been sued by a former business partner for breach of contract. The lawsuit itself wasn't remarkable, but the timing was around the same time Emily and I had attended a housewarming party Rachel had thrown. The last time I'd seen her in person, I couldn't help but wonder if whatever had ended Rachel's business relationship had also severed her friendship with Emily. As I combed through more records, the answer began to take shape. Financial filings showed that Rachel's former business partner was none other than Nathan. The realization hit me like a slap. Nathan wasn't just Emily's secret lover, he was connected to Rachel as well. I felt the pieces clicking into place. Though the picture they formed was still incomplete, had Rachel and Nathan's fallout somehow led to his involvement with Emily? Was Rachel the one sending me these warnings, using this tangled web to Settle an old score. The more I thought about it, the more plausible it seemed Rachel had a motive revenge on both Nathan and Emily for betraying her, and she had the means knowledge of Nathan's past and the ability to trace my actions through mutual connections, but what unsettled me most was the possibility that Rachel might have her own stash of evidence that could unravel everything I had worked so carefully to build. But by the next morning I knew I couldn't sit back any longer. If Rachel or whoever was behind this wanted to play games, I had to be one step ahead. I returned to the storage unit this time, prepared to dig deep or into anything I might have overlooked. When I arrived, the unit appeared untouched just as it had the night before, but as I began sifting through my belongings I noticed something unusual. One of the boxes I had carefully packed containing personal documents and old photos was slightly out of place. I had stacked it in the far corner, but now it was near the front. Its lid slightly askew inside. Everything seemed normal at first glance. Birth certificates, old tax returns, and property records were all where I'd left them, but tucked beneath a stack of photo albums was something I didn't recognize. A plain, unmarked envelope. I opened it cautiously, my stomach twisting with anticipation. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly. The message was simple but devastating: your wife isn't the only one with secrets. Think about where you were last year in April. My breath caught as I read the words April of last year, the month I had been on a work trip, spending 3 weeks in a different city for a major project. Emily had been supportive at the time, encouraging me to focus on my career while she held down the fort at home, but now with this note in hand, I wondered if that trip had been a turning point for her. Was that when her affair had started? Or was there something else, something about my own actions during that trip that this person wanted me to remember? As I racked my brain for answers, a memory surfaced one I hadn't thought about in months. On the last night of the trip, a group of us from the project team had gone out for drinks. It had been a casual evening, but I recalled one of my colleagues, Megan, pulling me aside. Toward the end of the night, she had confessed that she was going through a messy divorce and needed someone to talk to. I had walked her back to her hotel room that night, offering a listening ear, and nothing more. At least that's what I remembered. But now, with the note's cryptic message hanging over me, doubt crept in. Was there more to that night? Then I realized, had someone seen us together and twisted the story into something? It wasn't. The thought sent a chill down my spine. If this person had evidence linking me to Megan, even if it was fabricated, it could destroy my credibility. I had been so focused on exposing Emily's lies that I hadn't stopped to consider how vulnerable I might be to the same tactics. As I left the storage unit, I felt the noose tightening around me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about survival. Whoever was pulling the strings knew exactly where to hit, and they weren't done yet. That evening, as I sat in the motel room trying to piece together my next move, another text arrived. You're not as clean as you think. Ask Megan if she remembers April. The text was a gut punch. The mention of Megan wasn't just calculated, it was personal. Whoever was behind this knew exactly where to strike. It wasn't just about exposing Emily or Nathan anymore. It was about dismantling me piece by piece. I spent hours replaying the events of that April night. I had walked Megan to her room after the bar, offering her nothing more than support during a difficult time, or at least that's how I remembered it. But doubt crept in like a shadow, twisting the memory into something I could no longer fully trust. Had I done something to give the wrong impression, or worse, had Megan said something in passing that someone had taken and weaponized against me? The text demanded action, but I hesitated to contact Megan. Doing so could backfire spectacularly, especially if whoever was orchestrating this was waiting for me to reach out. Still, I needed answers. The truth was the only thing could clear the fog enveloping my mind. The next morning, I crafted a carefully worded email to Megan. I framed it as a simple check-in, asking if she remembered anything unusual from that trip. It wasn't long before I received a reply. Her response was brief, but chilling. I've been waiting for you to reach out. We need to talk. My heart sank. The implications were clear. Megan knew something, and it wasn't going to be good. We arranged to meet later that evening via video call. When her face appeared on the screen, she looked uneasy, her eyes darting as though she Expected someone to interrupt, she wasted no time getting to the point. Megan admitted that she had been approached a few months after our trip by a private investigator. He had asked her pointed questions about her time together. Specifically the night I walked her to her room. Megan swore she hadn't said anything to incriminate me, but she confessed that she had mentioned how much she appreciated my kindness during such a tough time being investigator. It seemed had twisted her words into something else entirely. Megan apologized, profusely insisting she hadn't meant to cause trouble, but the damage was already done. Whoever was behind this had used her comments to fabricate a narrative that cast doubt on my character. As the call ended, I realized the full scope of the game I was caught in. This wasn't just about Emily's affair or my retaliation. It was about control. Someone was pulling strings to manipulate both sides up a chain reaction of chaos that I was powerless to stop. The final piece fell in a place 2 days later. A package arrived at the motel addressed to me with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "You wanted the truth, here it is." My hand shook as I plugged the drive into my laptop. The contents were devastating. It contained photos, emails, and phone records that painted a picture far more complicated than I had imagined. First were the photos of Megan and me from that April night. Someone had followed us from the bar to her hotel, snapping pictures that made it look like we were far closer than we had been, combined with selective snippets of audio from conversations I didn't remember having. The evidence was damning, even though it was all fabricated. Then came the emails. Doctor, to appear as though I had been corresponding with Megan about a supposed affair. It was clear these were fake, but to anyone unfamiliar with my history they could seem legitimate. But the most damning piece of evidence wasn't about me at all. It was a recording of Emily and Nathan arguing in what appeared to be a hotel room. In the recording, Nathan accused Emily of orchestrating a plot to blackmail me, using Megan as a pawn to shift the blame away from herself. Emily's voice, cold and calculated, confirmed it all. She had planted the seed, hired the private investigator, and worked with Nathan to gather fake evidence against me. My mind reeled as I pieced it all together. Emily had known about my plans long before I served her the divorce papers. She had anticipated my moves and worked to undermine me at every turn. Nathan's involvement made sense. He stood to lose as much as she did if the affair became public. Together, they had concocted a story to make me the villain, hoping to destroy my credibility and take control of the narrative. But they had underestimated one thing: whoever had sent me the USB wasn't on their side. The final twist came in the form of a single folder on the drive labeled for leverage. Inside were records of Emily's financial transactions, hidden accounts, payments to the investigator, and even evidence of fraud at her job. Someone had been watching her long before I had. It didn't take long to figure out who. Rachel's name appeared repeatedly in the documents, her fingerprints all over the trail of breadcrumbs that had led to this moment. She had been the one pulling the rings, using my revenge plan as a tool to settle her own scores. At first, I felt betrayed. Rachel had used me as a pawn, manipulating me, just as Emily had. But as I stared at the evidence, I realized that Rachel's actions had given me the upper hand. With this information, I could dismantle Emily and Nathan's lives once and for all. The next few weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers. My lawyer was thrilled with the new evidence, using it to strengthen my case and discredit Emily entirely. By the time the divorce was finalized, she was left with nothing but the ruins of her reputation. Nathan disappeared from her life soon after, no doubt fleeing the fallout of their failed plot. And Rachel, she remained in the shadows, her motives never fully explained, but her presence unmistakable. As for me, I walked away with my dignity intact and a newfound resolve to never let anyone control my life again. The scars of betrayal would take time to heal, but I knew I was stronger for having faced the storm. In the end, the tangled web of lies and revenge unraveled, leaving only the truth in its wake, and for the first time in years I felt free.